Why do so many writers stop writing? Well, today we are going to hear from legendary novelist Roberto Bolaño on why so many of our compatriots are no longer in the struggle. Because I know countless writers who back in high school or in college said that one day I'm going to write a novel. And at some point along the way, they stopped writing. But we don't need to worry about them. I want to talk about you right now because some of you guys out there have not written a word in years. Some of you guys have fantasized about being a writer your entire life and never really gotten started. And as someone who has been friends and worked with so many writers, it could be anything. It could be a psychological confidence problem. It could be that you married some crazy chick or a domineering husband. It could be drugs, alcohol, addiction to technology. I've seen countless ways that people have stopped writing. But today, instead of hearing from me, we are going to hear Bolaño take a totally unique angle on this. He's not going to tell us about personal development and fixing your self-esteem like Brene Brown tells you to do, or putting affirmations on your wall. He's going to throw some info straight at us. And if you guys don't already know, my name is Ian, and here on Right Conscious, we cover the best books and authors of all time. And Roberto Bolaño is one of them. And if you check out the playlist down below, I am building a library of videos, on Bolaño. But that's not all we do here on Right Conscious. The most important thing I do is help authors and thinkers like you realign with your artistic vision so that one day you can transform the world with your art. But enough for me. Let us now hear from Bolaño. For example, I'm much more worried about Rimbaudian silence than I am about Rulfian silence. Rulfo stopped writing because he had already written everything he wanted to write and because he sees himself incapable of writing anything better. He simply stops. Rimbaud would probably have been able to write something much better, which is to say, bringing his words up even higher, but his is a silence that raises questions for Westerners. Rulfo's silence doesn't raise questions. It is a close silence, quotidian. After desert, what the hell are you going to eat? There is a third literary silence. One doesn't seek it. Of the shade, which one is sure was there under the threshold, and which has never been made tangible. There stands the silence of George Büchner, for example. He died at 25 or 24 years of age. He leaves behind 3 or 4 stage plays, masterworks. The silence of death is the worst kind of silence because Rulfian silence is accepted and Rimbaudian silence is sought. But the silence of death is one that cuts the edge off what could have been and never will be, that which we will never know. And do you guys know about Arthur Rimbaud? At age 16, Arthur Rimbaud wrote better poems than most MFAs and people who are getting published in poetry magazines now. And this was back in the 19th century. And at the age of 20, he decided after releasing his phenomenal work, Illuminations, that he was going to quit poetry. And here's a little quote from him from that collection. Idle youth, enslaved to everything. By being too sensitive, I have wasted my life. But why did Rimbaud stop? Funny enough, he started to smoke the ganja and take a little opium, start dabbling in some absinthe. But he was doing that at like 14 and 15. Like, he's like an OG, like he's a soul-ja. And Bolaño says that he's more in. So let me give you guys the framing here. So he also talked about Juan Rulfo, who wrote a great novel. I keep saying phenomenal. A beautiful novel named Pedro Páramo, and it's one of the kind of early surreal postmodern novels and very innovative. And to talk about the impact of this book is hard to do because Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who wrote 100 Years of Solitude, which influenced so much, said if it wasn't for this book, he wouldn't have written it. Borges's favorite novelist, favorite book, Pedro Páramo. But at the height of his career, as he was gaining momentum, he had written a couple novels. He decided that he felt like he had done all that he could do and quit around the age of 43. But he had a reason. He said that his father died and kind of affected him psychologically and didn't really want to deal with that type of stuff anymore. And so he just kind of worked a normal job for the last couple decades of his life and died. We can accept that. That's pretty epic. In a couple minutes, we're going to talk about why you guys aren't writing, why modern authors aren't writing. These guys have pretty epic excuses. We're looking at Juan Rulfo, and He kind of reminds me of like a reverse Chinese poet. Chinese poets, a lot of the time, would be these administrators in Chinese society, upper class individuals. And then for the last 2 or 3 decades of their life, they would leave their family once their kids were out of the house, retire, and go live in a shack out in the wilderness and just write poetry. But returning to Rimbaud, why did he stop? So at the age of 16, he's writing great stuff. And then at the age of 20, he just disappears. And for the next 17 years of his life, he travels around to 3 different continents and lives this extreme life. But a 20-year-old still has, as Bolaño said, a lot of potential to grow. And if you were a talented 20-year-old who was writing some of the best poetry of the time, you probably wouldn't quit. Writing is this weird subjective game where we're kind of comparing and competing against some of the, larger authors of the time and people who are currently writing. And so most authors are not very good, just like how most people who play basketball in comparison to LeBron James are not very good. And so imagine if you had that talent. Imagine if you were the LeBron getting drafted out of high school in the first round of poetry. You would be ecstatic. You would never think about quitting. Your wildest dreams, a professor job, book tours, thousands of women or men who want to be with you. Anything that you can imagine is right there. But then why would someone quit? And I think it speaks to something that a lot of people who want that, a lot of writers who sit down, and this kind of fucks their brain a lot anyway, they want to be a writer. They want all the stuff, but they're living in fantasy. And real writing, especially real poetry, happens not in fantasy, but in awareness, through seeing, through having a totally different perception of life and being able through your craft. And I have developed over on the Right Conscious Substack, a writing group that pulls you out of writer's block. We have a daily poetry challenge and a weekly prose challenge where we all come together and try and find accountability. We have already produced 100 poems that would never have been written, over 15 short stories that would still be existing in our mind. And if you are a fan of Bolaño, over on the Right Conscious Substack, we are reading, as you guys see down here, Roberto Bolaño's 2,666, alongside all of these other epic works: Gravity's Rainbow, Infinite Jest, IQ 84, a William T. Vollmann novel, 3 Cormac McCarthy novels, Moby Dick, and so much more. And so if you want to dive into Bolaño's masterpiece, I would love to see you over there. And once we're done with that one, we are going to continue on to his other works. And so if you're seeing this in the future, check out the link down in the description below for the Right Conscious Book Club, the writing group, all the courses, my own writing, and my daily office hours where I talk to readers and writers like you. And Bolaño, writes beautifully here when he talks about the silence of death, how many authors have died in their 20s and we really never got to see anything. Like, they didn't have a choice. They just died. Another person who, this reminds me of is John Keats, who died at 25. But let's talk about you guys now. People in 2024, why do writers stop writing? And the obvious answer, first and foremost, is there is a romanticization to it. We all were forced to write. Not all of us were forced to play music, to do film, to even do athletic sports, at a competitive level. But if you went through school, if you got a high school degree and tried hard and you went to college and tried to get good grades, you were forced to write well. I mean, probably not that well, but we were all in the game. You knew that girl in class who got homeschooled and was like religious or super nerdy and she was really good. And maybe you're like, damn, like she's a nerd, but like I have something within. I read Camus. She doesn't understand the darker elements of real writing and real art. And so, there's this kind of big data set of people who want to be writers. And the figures in writing, kind of the heroes, are larger than life figures. When I look at Stanley Kubrick, Orson Welles, even like David Lynch and other directors, I don't necessarily see that kind of superstar persona because they're the captain of the ship, but there are other elements involved. There are screenwriters and actors and all these other things. But a novelist, they create this entire thing from their mind. You are in total control. You have an editor and a book cover artist and stuff, but it's on you. And we also know how intimate it is to get inside someone's mind. When you read someone's book, you feel like you know them. And there's kind of this weird psychic sexual thing that happens that kind of makes you a magnet for attention, when you combine that with a persona and a personality, you get people like Hemingway, Nabokov, Mark Twain, Kurt Vonnegut, these kind of superstar personalities or figures in the writing world. So that sounds good. We all want that, or just a piece of that. I don't need to be famous. I just want to make my living doing this. But then you have to confront the actual process of doing it. You have to sit down and start writing at a desk. You have to sit there. in silence with your ADHD brain and all your other problems and start the process. And depending on your talent, you could be 15,000 hours behind. I would say when I analyze a lot of the people who we cover, McCarthy, Pynchon, David Foster Wallace, William T. Volman, Bolaño, they are smart. They, at a young age, were smarter than you. They had more talent. They went to better schools. They had more intelligent parents and had kind of artistic sensibilities also ingrained in them. And so there have also been people who haven't had talent and forced their way, but you start way behind. And so it's automatically discouraging to see something like Gravity's Rainbow or Infinite Jest or a Cormac McCarthy novel, and you suck at writing, just genetically, just the way that it is. And that result is 40,000 hours away of, and what you have to do is sit alone in a room. And worse yet, you may do the 40,000 hours and make no money at all, get no appreciation. There are very few skills that you could put 40,000 hours into and not get, at least some level of appreciation and attention for. And another thing a lot of writers don't see is they've never actually read a first draft of a famous author's novel. I've been to the Cormac McCarthy archive and read the first draft of Outer Dark, which is the only first draft available of any Cormac McCarthy novel. And it's terrible, you guys. I've also read like the third or fourth draft of Blood Meridian. Terrible. You guys wouldn't want to read it. If you didn't know it was Cormac McCarthy, you would put it down in 2 minutes. And that fourth draft of Blood Meridian was something he had put 5,000 hours into. Most people have only put 5,000 hours into, television, sports, and a bunch of random other shit. Never actually one specific purpose, one goal, one talent. And so that's just one book at the peak of his career. And so it's kind of hard to see the forest through the trees during this whole process as a young author. And so I think that wipes a lot of people out. They just kind of don't have the data and the confidence or the mindset to say that this is a 5 or 6 decade game that I'm starting to get into at the age of 20 years old. And of course, connected to that is the money thing, that even if you are doing a good job, the only way to make money a lot of the time, and this is starting to change, especially with the stuff I'm starting to do and help you guys out with in terms of building your audience and finding your way as an author in literary fiction and stuff. But probably the best way to earn a living as an author right now is to go get your MFA and get your PhD and go be a creative writing workshop professor. But you got to schmooze everybody. You got to be that person. You got to literally walk within the lines and be a certain type of person, shake the hands, be a certain political party, and jump through all the other diversity, equity, and inclusion barriers just to get there. And then you're just a slave to the system, to fellowships, to grants, all these other things. And that's where you don't want to be either. And I've known a ton of great writers who adopted the mentality that they had to just keep, I have to get a PhD and another fellowship and a job and all these things. I have a friend who is one of the better writers I personally know, and he got his PhD and it was all fully funded, but he can't find a job. He's a rich white male from a good neighborhood and wrote a dissertation on some super random thing. His interest, academically, something esoteric that isn't like sexy for, an interview. And he's not that social of a person. He's never he may get a community college job, like teaching a class or two, but he will never get a tenured position unless he like blows up. And so he's given up on writing. I mean, this was years ago, but he doesn't write anymore. And so I think as a writer, if you are connected to some certain outcome, you are going to fail. If you say like, if the X, Y, or Z doesn't happen, you just basically have to tell yourself like, damn, I might be starving for the rest of my life, or like, I'm gonna have to work a job and just like really put a lot of time into this and make decisions. Like if you want to do this, like if you want to be the best, if you want to be a Cormac McCarthy, and you're going to have to work a job, then you better not get a pet. You better not be in a relationship. You better not do any of that, because you're going to have to catch up to Cormac, who's 50,000 hours ahead of you. Why do you think he did? He only had a kid early in life who he didn't talk to. He divorced all of his wives because they didn't let him write. And this is the same of many artistic and entrepreneurial and many different pursuits if you're trying to get to the number one level. And unfortunately, because of the market, if you're going to sustain yourself as a literary fiction author, you're going to have to be at the top. And speaking of which, another one of the main reasons, and we can kind of transition now to some of the stuff I've seen, that people don't become writers is that their relationship partner doesn't want them to do it or isn't supportive of them. I've had countless friends who are writers, who are artists, who are entrepreneurs, and that is the number one killer. We can talk about money and these things, but It's the people around you. They control the mindset. They're the ones that frame what you are doing, who you fight against. And there's so many different rabbit holes involved in this. There are a lot of people out there, and I've dealt with people like this, who are just jealous that you're doing something artistic, doing something real. And so they take out their own insecurities and project that onto you. But then there are other relationships, like Cormac McCarthy's first relationship. David Foster Wallace was in a relationship like this. And many others where you are dating an artist, you are dating a writer, and things start to become competitive. A lot of people can't handle seeing someone else be successful in something that they also like to do. And that's on both sides. And just as a note for women, there are a lot of men also out there who, they view intellectual women, artistic women as something to dominate. And so they get with them, and then they want to diminish their artistic and, creative spirit, because, that, leads them to question things in their relationship and other things, and gives them life. And their whole purpose is to diminish them because they don't have any light inside of them. And so families and relationships are the number one killer. In the Right Conscious Book Club right now, we are reading A Confederacy of the Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. And he was practically, a very, very good writer. I could say almost a genius. And his mom was talking shit to him every single day. He was writing letters to his friends saying, like, my mom yells at me every day and calls me a retard and tells me I'm never going to amount to anything and I suck. And he eventually killed himself. Ernest Hemingway's mom dressed him up as a girl for the first 8 years of his life and fucked him up in the head for the rest of his life. So the people around you can really influence how your writing career is going to go. And a lot of the time we don't have a choice for that. And that's, once again, why writing is is really an early man's game. That if you can get into it and commit to it early and push everyone else aside and make that the main thing for enough time, then you'll be ahead of even some of the talented people who get into it when they have a family or these types of things. And so a lot of people quit writing because of their relationships. A lot of people also quit writing because of drugs and alcohol. We have this romanticization of drugs and alcohol in our culture, especially with artists. But creatives have a predisposition to being addicts. It's both live in deep amounts of fantasy all throughout their day. And we hear of Dostoevsky, the gambling addict. We hear of Charles Bukowski, the alcoholic, these types of guys. But what of all the other people who didn't have as strong of a will, and alcohol and weed and these other things ruined them? I have a friend, we'll call him George, and he's a drinker, man. He wants to be a writer. He rambles around the country. He finds the most odd jobs so that he can just write all the time. He works in mines. He works in weird places in Alaska. I mean, whatever job, whenever, wherever, as long as it's easy and he can get some money and spend his time writing, he's doing it. But he's an alcoholic. He's drinking every single night. And he's a talented writer. Like, honestly, he's read all the big books. He's put all the time in. He's nuanced and sensitive. But alcohol has held him back. Alcohol has really just kind of ruined his life and got him into this rut that he's been in, from what I can tell, for about a decade. He's probably been drinking longer than that. But just since I've known him, when I met him, he was Sprite and excited about being a writer. And now he's just all kind of washed out. And he got over all the other plateaus. He doesn't care about the money. He pushes away every single woman, but it's the drugs and alcohol. And marijuana and psychedelics really, it depends on the person, but they can be very problematic for the creative experience, because writing and art is about metaphor. It's about contrast. And when you get super zooted, you start to blend in. And same with yoga and meditation. That's why when you look at yoga, the East, China, and like specifically India, where is India's Paradise Lost? Where are India's masterpieces? I know about the Gita and the Ramayana and all those works, but objectively, they have nothing anywhere close to what the West has produced. And that's because their religious systems, their kind of attitude and lifestyle, especially kind of at the elite level, is more of one of integration, of communing with God and oneness and detachment and those types of things. And that doesn't lend itself well to, first of all, sitting down and having the will and the drive and the death impulse or whatever to write this epic novel. But the integration and the lack of ability to create metaphor is a big thing. One of my professors, Lee Barnes, knew Ken Kesey, and he told him that he stopped writing actually because he lost the ability, because of too much psychedelic use, to create metaphor. He felt everything was one. He was happy. He was content. He had no more drive or separation in his life or in his creative mind to be able to do that. And if you do pranayama, yoga, meditation, psychedelic drugs, marijuana, you can hit that level eventually. And that's why I've personally noticed that a lot of the best authors have, earlier in life experimented with psychedelics and weed and stuff, but stopped doing it later in life. You have a lot of quack artists who smoke marijuana and write, like James Patterson, Jack Kerouac, Hunter S. Thompson, Philip K. Dick, Ginsberg. I mean, I love every author I just said, but did they reach the level of canon? Did they reach the top? And eventually, as Cormac McCarthy had to do, he had to give up alcohol and marijuana and other drugs. You have to make these sacrifices along the way, not just with drugs, but also with our next category, which is entertainment. I know a lot of you guys out there are fans of sports, fans of whatever, I don't know, pastime or entertainment, and that's okay. And you can have some of that. But, when you look at the average person and how they get sucked into it, your brain only has so much computational power, because sitting down and watching UFC fight, once a month, a pay-per-view, no big deal, right? But checking your phone all the time and looking at the news and watching all the other mini fights and the undercard and all this other stuff and keeping up with the drama and what Conor McGregor's up to, that sucks energy away from you. And if you add, so you have the UFC, okay, maybe that's not terrible, but what about you have an NFL team, NBA team? What's Liverpool doing over in England? And other forms of media and stuff can also be added to this. There is such a thing as decision fatigue. And so it's something you have to watch out for, and something that stops a lot of writers from continuing to write and take it seriously, because writing is really about consistency. I'm sure, as you guys have, no writer in history talks about their novel and says, yeah, I wrote for a month or two, then I took 8 months off, and then I was back at it again. It's like, no, these guys, even if they're only writing a little bit every day, they're writing it almost every single day of the week until at least a draft is done. And then maybe they'll take a break. But they have schedules, they have routines. This isn't, you don't go to the coffee shop or the bar and sit and write. Like, no, you have to have a routine. You have to show up and do it. And that's circling back to the three things we just talked about. Technology and that type of addiction can throw you off from your routine. I've been there before. I've been meaning to make a video or write, and suddenly I'm watching a YouTube video for an hour. Negative relationships can sap energy out of you. If you are in a fight, or you're getting yelled at, or you're worried about something, that's energy going down the tube. Drugs and alcohol, energy down the drain. And if you don't have the energy, you're not going to be motivated. And then when you show up, you're going to write some shit, and then you're going to, go boo-hoo-hoo, I can't do anything, and forget that, all first drafts suck, and then suddenly you're not writing anymore. And suddenly it's been 5 years, and you're still working on that novel. And so if you guys want to learn how to rip yourself out of writer's block, I have a free course over on my school. The link is down in the description below. And if you guys want courses on how to build your audience for people who will read your literary fiction or poetry, how to write poetry or fiction better, and how to escape writer's block, it is all in the free community down below, and I would love to see you over there. Have a great day. Hope you guys are writing or can find a way to pull yourself out of the rut, and I will see you guys in the next video.